Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're joined now by the Republican governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu. And it's good to have you here.
Thanks.
In person.
Great to be here. Better here than the rest of Washington, because this whole town gives me the chills sometimes.
Well, you might need to go get over that if you're going to run for 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, as apparently you are considering doing.
Well, look, a lot of opportunity to change things, right? I think New Hampshire has this awesome model of live free or die. Limited government, local control, individual responsibility, really putting the voters first. Send them some money, which is nice, but send them the regulatory authority too. So a little decentralizing out of Washington and maybe a little better attitude would be a good thing for America.
What's the proactive reason you want to be president? Not something that President Biden's doing wrong, but something you want to achieve.
Yeah, which is the right question you're asking, by the way, because it drives me crazy when Republicans talk in an echo chamber about, how bad, the president is and Democrats. We got the memo as Republicans. You got to be for something. What I'm trying to do is kind of show that New Hampshire model, show the opportunity to get stuff done. I've had Republicans in my legislature, I have Democrats in my legislature. I always get my conservative agendas done. We always cut taxes. We always balance a budget. And I can explain to folks in Washington what a balanced budget actually means. So there are paths, and I think America is looking for results. We need results-driven leadership, not just leadership whether it's cutting taxes, being pro-business, the regulatory reform, the immigration stuff that we were told was going to happen in 2017 and 2018 as Republicans, and it didn't. We were told health care reform would happen. It didn't. We were told we were going to secure the border, and we didn't. So there's all this great opportunity that has a domino effect. They're not just things to check off a list, but those things have huge impacts on the American economy and, most importantly, American families, right? They just want flexibility to do what they do, and frankly, they're tired of the nonsense in D.C. They're tired of extreme candidates. They're tired of gridlock. They want somebody to come to the table. And it could be myself. It could be other governors. But it has to be leadership with proven results. I've been in the private sector as an engineer and a business leader. I've been in the public sector. You got to be able to deliver. And you got to hopefully be inspirational and hopeful as opposed to all this negativity you see.
But you still have to get the Congress to work with you to do that very long laundry list of things you just read off to us. So when you were here in November, you told us that President Biden would not run for president, in your estimation. You just saw him up close for the past few days. Is that still what you believe?
Well, I know other people will definitely run. They're going to get in the race.
Democrats, you believe?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because
why do you say that? Did someone tell you that in the last few days?
Well, Joe Biden has tried to move the first in the nation primary from New Hampshire, right? But we're going first, whether the president likes it or not. And so that's going to be a huge opportunity for anybody who wants to step up and challenge him. And if you look at the polls across the country, the average Democrat says, yeah, thanks for your service on one term, but let's keep it to one term, President Biden. And I just don't believe the Democrat left-wing elite is going to sit on the sidelines knowing you could come to New Hampshire, get all the earned media, all the attention, without a whole lot of money, all that political momentum. He's opened up his political flank, so to say, to give someone else a huge opportunity to charge right through and take that nomination from him.
Well, we'll see if your projection plays out. You've been talking about trying to sort of remind the party that Republicans are about limited government. Yeah. You said recently Republicans are almost trying to outdo Democrats at their own game of being big government and having a solution and a say on everything. Who are you thinking of when you say that?
There's a lot. I think there's a lot of leadership out there that forgets at heart, I'm a principled free market conservative. Let the markets decide. So there's no individual per se, but there's a lot of leadership that says, you know what? When we're not getting that result out of a private business or a locality, we'll just impose from the top down our conservative will.
You're not talking about the Florida governor and Disney, for example.
That's a bad example. Yeah, that's an example. One of the many examples.
Ron
you see out
DeSantis
there.
may be running for president as well.
Yeah. Look, Ron's a very good governor. He is. But I'm just trying to remind folks what we are at our core. And if we're trying to beat the Democrats at being big government authoritarians, remember what's going to happen. Eventually, they'll have power in a state or in a position, and then they'll start penalizing conservative businesses and conservative nonprofits and conservative ideas. That is the worst precedent in the world. That's exactly what the Founding Fathers tried to avoid. And so I'm trying to remind my conservative friends about federalism, free markets, and being for the voter first, being for the individual. Do I like what every private business does? No. I hate this woke cancel culture. But it's a cultural...
What does that mean to you, then?
Woke cancel culture?
Yeah.
Oh, look,
because you're not a culture warrior, really.
No, but it's there.
What does that mean on your platform?
It's the divisiveness we see not not just in our schools, but in our communities, where it is me versus you. Whereas if you are not adhering to my ideals, then I'm going to cancel you out. It is us versus them. It's this binary where everything's a war. That's a cultural problem we have to fix in America. And it starts with good leadership, good messaging, more hopeful and optimistic. But government never solves a cultural problem. We can lead on it, but we never solve it.
Interesting idea, but you are contradicted by the Republican governor of Arkansas, who gave the response for your party after the State of the Union, who embraced culture war. She says America's in one.
Yes, we are.
She says it's being waged by the left wing, a woke mob that can't even tell you what a woman is.
That's absolutely right. And
are you going to engage on things like this, like Sanders and DeSantis has, in terms of issues on gender and issues of race?
There should be absolute leadership on that, about what that's about. And this idea that, you have to, we have forced language, that we have forced ideas on our kids, that we're going to force anything.
So you are going to be a culture warrior?
No, we have to talk about that, but it isn't the government's role to solve it. The government is not here to solve your problems. It's not. The government is here to create.
So a governor shouldn't be actually talking and engaging and telling school boards and doing things like this, or trying to pass laws like they are?
I don't think governors should be trying to pass laws to subvert the will of the voters that know better than us. Voters know more than I do. The voters on that school board know. The voters in those towns know a lot more. And if that's the free market of politics, if they don't like the school board, they go to town meeting, they fire them.
You call yourself a pro-choice Republican. You still have to win in a Republican primary. Is there room for someone who calls himself a pro-choice Republican?
Oh yeah, look, that issue is going to change 3 different ways now that Dobbs has happened, right? States can decide what they want to do, right? So I think the definition of pro-life and pro-choice and pro-abortion are going to be very different, because if you're a pro-life Republican, that's fine. As a governor, you can do that. You can ban it in your state, and you can stand behind those ideals. And maybe that's exactly what your state wants. No problem. I'm a pro-choice Republican in a very pro-choice state. But at the end of the day, you're going to have the pro-life over here, pro-abortion over here, and then the rest of us are, well, we have a 24-week ban, and you have a 22-week and an 18-week ban. So the rest of us are kind of in this spectrum of debating about weeks. So that the whole conversation is going to change.
We want to talk about some of these issues in depth with you in a moment, so stay with us, Governor, and we're going to bring in a panel of bipartisan governors with us. And we're back with Governor Sununu, and we're joined by Democrat Wes Moore, who was just sworn in as Maryland's first black governor. Michelle Lujan Grisham is the Democratic governor of New Mexico. Republican Doug Burgum is the governor of North Dakota. And it's good to have you all here at the table together.
Yes. Thanks for having us.
Great to be with you, too.
I want to talk about some of these issues of common cause. Governor Burgum, I know the fentanyl crisis, the drug crisis, was a topic at the White House in recent days. Your state is one of 6 with the lowest rates of drug overdose deaths, according to the CDC. How is that possible when this is a national crisis?
Well, I think all of our governors, we're all border states now with the fentanyl that's coming into this country, perhaps manufactured in China, coming across the southern border. But in North Dakota, we've really taken an approach of understanding that if you're going to have a war on drugs, which is this thing we've been doing in our country since the 1970s and 80s, it can become a war on people who have a health issue. Addiction is a disease. And so we want to be very tough on the people that are importing and distributing, but we also have to understand that if people have the disease of addiction, it's not a moral choice or a failure. And so we've taken an approach on a number of fronts. One of the things that's been most successful is treating the disease of addiction is with peer support specialists, because we know now that someone who's got lived experience, whether that's in the criminal justice system or living with the disease of addiction and in recovery, that they can help people through it as much as an addiction counselor. So the whole approach is we've turned it towards one of treating this as a national health crisis, which it is. So we want to be tough on suppliers, but we want to be super supportive of those that are dealing with it.
I really appreciate that approach. That is probably going to be the nexus of real bipartisan work. In New Mexico, we have a significant issue with substance abuse and overdose deaths. And I wish I could tell you that fentanyl is not a problem. It is. And in fact, we were part of a FBI sting with one of the largest fentanyl busts in United States history. 1 million pills, $2 million in cash. But we didn't have any behavioral health system when I became governor. The former administration literally canceled behavioral health. And there were no providers. They were all in litigation. Everybody left to other states. So now you have a crisis on top of a national building crisis that COVID did none of us any favors to really address. Evidence-based work about making sure that treatment is available is exactly how we're going to get ahead of this. So all of the upfront, so dealing with poverty and food security and jobs and workers and good education while we're treating folks who are currently dealing with this disease. And I think we can start to do that regionally with creative solutions that allow Medicaid to pay for services across states when it's behavioral health. And we've eliminated copays for behavioral health services.
And this is something you're asking the federal government for help to do?
You know, I didn't actually do that during that. It's a limited who can ask questions, and that sounds awful. We want to make sure that we're all benefiting by a topic matter that we can all take back with us and get a sense where the federal government is headed. But the Western Governors Association, which is another really effective example about bipartisan work, we're interested in taking on behavioral health in a more regional effort, and following some of the best practices of North Dakota absolutely is going to make its way into achievements and better outcomes in New Mexico.
Governor Moore, I mean, you're new on the job, but what is it that you plan to execute to deal with this problem?
Well, you know, I think what was said here is a really important point, where we cannot go through the process, excuse me, the idea that we're going to criminalize our way out of this. And I think we've learned that throughout this process, that we're dealing with behavioral health and mental health. When you look at the proposed budget that we laid out, our proposed budget makes historic increases of 39%. That's actually focusing exclusively on substance abuse disorders, on making sure that we're actually helping people when they're returning from incarceration. Things like how are we dealing with elements of record expungement, job retraining, job reskilling, making sure there's a better reintegration with the family. But there has to be a larger holistic way in the way that we are dealing with this challenge, because it is true. We have spent 2 decades now dealing with a behavioral health challenge essentially by criminalizing it. And there are long-term consequences, economic consequences, societal consequences that I know in the state of Maryland that we are aggressively pushing on within the way our administration is looking at this work.
We were looking at some of the research, and in Maryland, in one county, they've had to use Narcan on students 11 times in the past year. And you're actually putting this in the schools because this is so common? Because
we have to. And that's the thing. As an administration, I always say, you know, as a leader, I am data-driven and heart-led. Right? I wear my heart on my sleeve, but I don't move without data. And the data has been so clear about the damage that this has done to our communities, both urban and rural.
And children, apparently.
And children. And to the point where we've actually now appointed a special secretary who's a former mayor of Hagerstown, who actually got into politics because of the issue of opioid addiction, had her best friend lost to an overdose, who is now serving as our special secretary on this exact issue.
You were nodding at the Narcan in school.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Look, one of the biggest issues is...
This is a drug when someone overdoses to basically help them survive.
And Narcan works for the most part. We can talk about where it doesn't work, but schools. You need access points to schools. Kids need to know that that there is help there, what those systems are. Rural access to care is absolutely huge. People have to understand it's not a 28-day problem, right? That's old school thinking. Sometimes recovery is a lifelong journey, so you need recovery-friendly workplaces. You need wraparound housing and those types of services. Understand that also the fentanyl crisis, it's now being mixed with everything. It's in vape cartridges. It's in marijuana. It's being mixed with xylazine. And let me tell you, if you don't understand the xylazine fentanyl crisis that's coming, it's horrid. It negates the ability of Narcan to revive you. And it's so the mixing of everything, I call it a cartel-driven crisis now. It's no longer overprescription. That's always part of it. But the cartels have such access, and they're basically creating their own markets. They're putting it in Adderall. They're mixing it with black market Adderall. They're mixing it with Xanax.
How are people buying it?
Black market. As inflation goes up, more people go to buy their pharmaceuticals offline, and so they're going to get Adderall for the kids offline. It becomes mixed, or the kids try to buy vape cartridges offline, and it becomes mixed with fentanyl. And the dealers know, look, we might lose a couple, but we're going to create addicts out of it. And so the crisis is the mixing, where we have so many folks that overdose that had no idea they were even doing fentanyl.
But we need to be careful, in my view, that we don't do this paradigm, just shifting from one extreme to the other. Absolutely, organized crime and cartels, which are embedded in every state, have to be held accountable, and we all collectively. That's a federal and state-by-state issue.
And you have asked the federal government for more FBI agents,
I have.
and they denied you that request.
Well,
Why?
so far, I'm tenacious. I'm bet on me. I'm gonna get those agents. But to your point, if we were all using our National Guard to some degree, we need them for our own state emergencies. But if we were doing drug interdiction work, then we're dealing with the bad guys and gals in this system, and we need to do that collectively. Instead, we're doing it, I do a little, you do a little, you do. We should be doing it collectively. That's the right kind of leveraging.
One thing that we've stopped even using the word overdose, because no one is making a choice to kill themselves, as Chris was saying. I mean, these people don't know what they're taking. We have an epidemic of just huge proportions like we've never had before. And you talked about FBI. One of the things that's happening across the western U.S. on all of the tribal lands, like the sovereign nations that we share geography with in North Dakota, is they don't have enough BI agents. The federal government, forget FBI, so the Bureau of Indian Affairs that would be doing that drug interdiction, their staffing is way down. Organized crime is preying on those tribal communities, and that's where they're basing their operations out of.
And you're seeing it in your tribes as well.
We're seeing that too, yes.
This is a huge topic, but I want to make sure I get to you on the issue of abortion, because, of course, the Supreme Court threw this back to state capitals in June when they overturned Roe versus Wade. Governor Burgum, the very last abortion provider in your state, left after that Supreme Court decision. What has been the impact of that? Well, of not having that care?
Well, in the case of this case, because the last one was in Fargo, it moved about 400 yards. It's now in Minnesota. So the effect of people having access to care is really
They leave.
Well, they leave, but they're going 400 yards further east. And I think this is what will happen across our nation. It's now back in the hands of states. North Dakota has proven at the ballot box, the citizens voting. Our legislature very much is a pro-life with exception states. And so this is something that the state of North Dakota has been pursuing for a long time. But as Chris was talking about in the earlier segment, this is something that I think states can decide, and I think it ought to be decided at the state level.
It's a long way for a lot of people to travel, though, if they're not in Fargo. No? I mean, what has been the impact in your state?
We're seeing women all across America come to New Mexico, and it is a long way to travel. And what about aftercare? And what about your family? And what about the other potential family members, like other small children? It is catastrophic. This is where I think constitutional rights are a federal matter, making sure that wherever I live in this country, one country, that my constitutional rights, my bodily autonomy ought to be protected. And with all due respect for people who have who morally oppose my position on abortion, they don't have to seek that care. But women who need that care get limited or reduced or eliminated access, and women die all across this country. And we're going backward, and I could not disagree more with my good friend Doug about this being a state-to-state matter. I want to ask you on a very
specific issue how you are planning to spin this forward, because abortion's legal in New Hampshire, Maryland, New Mexico. The majority of abortions provided in this country happen via pill these days. And there's a Texas court decision that is pending that might strike down FDA approval, as I understand it. Are you preparing? Are you stockpiling the drug? Are you planning at all?
We are preparing. As long as I'm the governor of the state of Maryland, that Maryland will be a safe haven for abortion rights. I believe abortion is healthcare. This is really about how are we coming up with multiple ways of preparing for this and ensuring that all women know that we believe that their health, their safety, and their security, and of the providers is something that should be guaranteed in the state of Maryland.
Are you stockpiling the drug or no?
We're not yet stockpiling the drug, but we're in preparation for that.
But I think that stockpiling might be, if I can push back a little, the wrong question. Do we have enough of those drugs available in places, and each state's going to be a little different, but you can get those in our public health system. We're moving towards tribal nations providing access in any number of ways, including abortion, direct abortion care inside a clinic. In addition, and the chilling effect of not having these medications now routinely manufactured is they're used to treat men and women for other, like bleeding ulcers. We're going to have deaths unrelated because doctors are saying, in my state, I can't prescribe this. So this decision could have an even more chilling effect. So we're trying to figure out ways. Can we get a manufacturer? How much do we have? How long does it last? What are we doing about contraceptives and contraceptive care and sex education and school-based health centers? So all of the above approach, we're in.
Governors, thank you very much for your time today. There's so much more to talk to you about. I enjoyed this. We'll be back in a moment. We find ourselves in yet another moment where global crises seem to be converging, and yet another reminder for us about how to put it all into perspective. 4 times in the past 8 days, U.S. fighter jets scrambled to take out perceived threats tens of thousands of feet above North America.
That is a key kill. The balloon is completely destroyed.
The spy balloon and aerial objects are a dramatic wake-up call that the U.S. isn't quite as insulated or as isolated as many like to think. Record-level migration was already an unmistakable sign that failing governments, dramatic climate shifts, and economic strain thousands of miles away eventually end up on America's doorstep. As President Biden pointed out Friday, the 2 biggest democracies in the Americas both recently withstood insurrections staged by far-right mobs.
Both the United States and Brazil, democracy prevailed.
Democracy also feels under strain in Israel, where tens of thousands took to the streets Saturday to protest against their new right-wing government. Meanwhile, Ukraine's democracy continues its year-long battle to survive Vladimir Putin's brutal onslaught. NATO warned last week that China is expanding its nuclear arsenal, and so is North Korea. Kim Jong-un paraded a dozen intercontinental ballistic missiles down Pyongyang streets Wednesday. And if the food and migration crisis in drought-stricken East Africa wasn't already a sign of Mother Nature's power, she sent us another signal Monday. This one has taken the lives of 28,000 and counting lives in Turkey and war-torn Syria. For all of us, the ground does feel like it is shifting. Global instability may be a constant for the near future, and that may be a needed reminder to put our petty political disagreements in perspective. We'll be right back. This programming note, Caitlin Huey-Burns and our investigative team unravels the mystery of who is George Santos in a new CBS Reports documentary that's available through our CBS News app. That's it for us here at Face the Nation today. Thank you all for watching. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.